Hey you guys, what is up? It is Fuspo, and today I'm recording a different video, if you couldn't tell already. I just wanted to take the time to basically share my experience at West Coast during my OB term, or my maternal nursing term. Now, obviously, if you couldn't tell already, I am a nursing student. I probably have said that a lot on this channel. And I just wanted to basically share some tips since it is the end of the term, and by the time I upload this, it will be the start of the new term. So, again, I just wanted to share my thoughts on the OB term, what to expect, what to study, how to study, and some tips and tricks on how to pass this term based on my experience. And next term, I'll be moving on to peds, and I may or may not, hopefully, if I can remember to, share my experience with you guys. So, at least for West Coast, or for West Coast University, we have a dedicated skills day. Now, this means that everyone in the cohort on a dedicated day, usually around week 1, is where we will all gather to do skills, maternal skills. So at least in my cohort, there were about over 100 plus students, almost 200 students in that same on campus, and I attend the one in Ontario, so it's already very already packed as it is. It was a little bit chaotic, but it was still a good experience in terms of learning some new skills. Obviously, that skills day is also where you would take your med math exam. So again, for OB, you're going to need to know basic dosage calculations like injectables, powdered, liquid medications, IV medications as well, and also a little bit of a critical care. There was a bit of critical care med math in there, so please study up on that if you haven't already. And there was no pediatrics medication, no weight-based medication, if I can remember correctly, unless they changed the standard by the time I'm recording this. But from what I've taken, or from when I took it, there wasn't really anything like that. Another thing on Skills Day is that obviously you're going to learn the basic principles of pregnancy. So you're gonna do a quick run. You're gonna learn a quick rundown of the different types of cycles, what to expect during pregnancy, what happens during an emergency if there's the mom is bleeding out, or if the baby comes out funny looking, and other things like that. And also, obviously, since it's skills, you're gonna practice some skills. In this case, we practice some skills such as starting an IV, refreshed also on blood transfusions, as these will be relevant when you move on to the theory class. And this is also where we would be introduced to your clinical professors. They'll basically do a brief introduction about who they are, what to expect for the clinical site that you're assigned to. In this case, I was assigned to a Kaiser, or not Kaiser, sorry. I was assigned to a community hospital. My apologies. And they basically just said like, oh, what to expect, where to park, yada yada, right? And also another thing to note as well is that clinical days for pediatrics and OB, you only meet every other week. Now, the term usually lasts about 10 weeks, and we usually meet for all 9 weeks, but this time we are only going to meet 4 of those 9 weeks. So just keep that in mind and plan your schedule accordingly. So speaking of theory class, I'm going to now move on to the theory class. So when I was studying for this term, I usually study how I usually study for every other term. Even before I went on into West Coast University, when I was taking my gen eds prerequisites, I studied this way, and it always worked for me. Now, obviously, this may not work for everyone, but this is just my input and my experience and how it helped me get up to this point. How I study is through active recall. If you don't know what active recall is, it's basically saying stuff out loud and constantly like applying yourself, or applying everyday things to the theory. So, for example, let's say I'm learning about fundal massages, right? Fundal massages are, if I can remember correctly, they are used to help constrict blood flow. And if you constrict blood flow, the patient will not bleed out. And if the patient doesn't bleed out, then they are not at risk for anemia, and you get the point. I'm basically connecting the dots constantly. And how I do active recall is that what I would do is that I would basically teach myself in terms of reading the lecture. So, for example, my professor would record her lectures and post it on her Canvas page. And for me as a student, I would listen to her lecture, or a slide or a topic of the lecture. I would write it down, like copy and paste what she said on the recording, type it out or write it down, whatever. And once she's done with that topic or on that slide, I would then pause the recording, turn away from my computer so I'm not looking at her slide, and try to recite it word for word, or at least paraphrase it to the point where as if I was the one teaching the class. And I would do this for every single week. Now, I know that does sound tedious, but trust me, it works. At least for me, it does. And because of repetition, because of that active recall and applying, it's also going to just, be ingrained in your head. And by the time exam day comes, you're gonna know it, and it's gonna be an easy A. Another thing as well, at least that helped me out, that I found out, was the use of whiteboards. Now on campus, they usually have like these study rooms, and there's a bunch of whiteboards. Now, me personally, at the time, even before entering OB, I didn't really see the use of study rooms until I figured out that, hey, my own household is kind of chaotic. I live with my parents and other family members, so it's not always quiet. And me personally, I like somewhere where it's quiet. So I would either go to the local library where I live, and I would just study there. And besides doing the active recall, I would apply, or not apply, sorry, I would utilize their whiteboards. I even bought myself my own marker set, and I would do the same thing, but instead of saying it out loud, I would just write it down, which in my opinion is just as effective. But again, that's just my opinion. Active recall, writing stuff down, and basically, again, looking away from your computer after listening to a lecture and like reciting what the professor said word for word verbatim, or paraphrasing it to have like the topic as it is, that would help me. And some basic concepts that I learned that I thought were helpful that you should know are stuff like the Nagel's rule, which is basically how you can calculate an expected due date for the mom. So just a quick rundown, Nagel's rule, how to know what the expected due date is you would look at the date of the woman's or the patient's last menstrual cycle period, and then you would subtract that date by 3 months, add 7 days, and then add 1 year. So for example, let's say the woman's last menstrual period was April 4th. So we would subtract 3 months. So April is number 4, so subtract 3 months. That would be January, so January 4th, but then you would add 7 days. So we said April 4th minus 3 months, January 4th plus 7 days, January 11th, and then plus 1 year. So let's say April 4th, 2024, it would be January 11th, 2025. There you go, simple as that. And another concept that I think is going to be very helpful is what's called a GT-PAL score. GTPAL basically stands for G for gravida, the amount of times you're pregnant. T stands for the how many babies were born full term. P stands for how many babies were born preterm. And then A is abortion, either spontaneous like a miscarriage or planned like an actual scheduled abortion. And L is for living children. You're going to need to know that to basically get a maternal history of the mom, and some other things like what to eat as a mom during pregnancy, what not to do, what are some complications to look out for, what are some signs and symptoms of certain diseases for the babies, and so on and so forth. And again, if you just apply that practice of what I taught you guys are going to pass no time. Another thing as well is that you guys unfortunately do have a proctor for this term. I know that proctor exams are not the best and not the greatest. I mean, if there's one upside, you don't get a midterm. You just get a proctor, and after the proctor you get the final. And for me personally, the final was easier than the proctor in my opinion. So for me, how I studied for proctored is just doing straight ATI dynamic quizzing, and I suggest you do it early. Like for me, my OB class was on Thursdays. I did not start until Monday. So after the Thursday before my scheduled proctor, I didn't start studying until Monday. So that's about almost 3 days wasted of not even looking at the material. And I suggest, for me personally, to not even like look at the ATI chapters. Just go on ATI, click on dynamic quizzing, and just click on or filter it just for maternal nursing /OB only. Don't even look at med surg, don't look at nutrition or fundamentals, just look at OB. And that's the good thing about this class, is that this class is dedicated to having an OB section of ATI. All right, so that was it for about the theory portion, and then I'm gonna now explain the clinical portion. So like I mentioned before, you guys are only gonna have clinical 4 times this term instead of the full 9 weeks. So that gives you about, only 4 times you're gonna be in the clinical setting, and only about 4 chances you're ever gonna see, hopefully, a live birth or whatnot. in my during my term, I was had the privilege to witness both a C-section birth and a vaginal birth. And just a quick rundown on the C-section. I love both of them. Both of the patients and the couples and families were very nice. So just a quick rundown from my experience. The C-section, it was cool. It was very interesting to see, how the physicians, were cutting the patient's uterus open and to actually deliver the baby. And that was the first time I ever seen in person. They show you videos, but I'll tell you right now that it is very different from actually seeing it live. And one thing to note, try not to pass out, and be very friendly to the surgical tech because they will chew you out. It is considered an operation, so you guys have to be sterile. So please, please, please follow the directions of the scrub tech. And also, I did witness a vaginal birth, which was also incredible to see because, not to get TMI or anything, but it is very fascinating to see, just a baby being born. We talk about stuff like that, we learn about stuff, but again, it's just very interesting to see that live. It's hard to explain, and you have to be there to really understand it. So I'm praying that you guys get to experience that, and I know that you guys will do well on that clinical. And some other things to know for clinical is that some assignments that are going to be mandatory that you need to complete are head to toe exam, a teaching project, and of course your clinical judgment plan. Now, out of all of these things, I'd argue that the teaching project would be the easiest, then the head to toe, then the clinical judgment plan. I'm not going to go over into the CJP because that's pretty self-explanatory, but the head to toe exam, you're basically going to do a specialized head to toe exam. Now, if you remember physical assessment, you have to do all this stuff like the head, blah, 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 chest, bowels. You have to do that kind of for OB, but during theory, they'll teach you what's called the bubble assessment. The bubble assessment is basically a specialized maternal exam just for women and specifically pregnant women. And then the other assignment that I mentioned was the teaching project. The teaching project is basically where you had to go to an actual patient in the hospital with your professor, and you're just gonna basically explain them like a different topic that you've heard of, or whatever your professor assigns you. For our class, our professor gave us the freedom to choose our own topic, and I chose postpartum hemorrhage. So what I did for my experience for the teaching project was that I just told them what a postpartum hemorrhage was, what the signs and symptoms are, what to do, like call your doctor, and what medications to take with it. And I also want to emphasize the importance of getting involved. Do not be afraid to do things, because this is the only time you're gonna be able to experience and actually like practice your skills, besides having like an additional skills day / free time of simulation. I mean, yes, it is scary, don't get me wrong, but it's good that you get this experience now. And again, you only meet there 4 times this term, not the whole 9 weeks. And for me, I was afraid to do a urinary catheter on this patient during my OB term, and I wish I actually would have started sooner, because now I feel more confident and now I actually know what I'm doing, But anyways, yeah, that's pretty much it at the moment. Overall, this term would be significantly easier than intermediate med surg, in my opinion. This was significantly easier in terms of the workload. Besides the proctor, it was pretty much straight to the point type thing. And I just want to end this off by saying to utilize your resources. Don't be afraid to reach out to your professor, and also try to attend tutoring as much as you can. At least for me, the tutoring that my professor held was very helpful and insightful, and she was able to explain different concepts that I was unfamiliar with. And also, I suggest that if you haven't already, try to get in touch with fellow classmates or other students that are in the same term as you, or maybe that know a bit or thing or two about this maternal stuff, and just so you could establish that community, and also that you're helping each other out, so you could pass the term and move on. But anyways, guys, I just wanted to leave you guys off with that advice. I know this is kind of different again, but don't worry, other Roblox videos and gaming videos are going to come out soon. But I figured I wanted to share my experience with OB with you guys. Anyways, guys, thank you guys for watching, and as always, I shall talk to you all later.